Hello and welcome to the Locker Room. It is a place where women talk about sports. I'm Sara Gross, and I am here with the lovely and talented, if slightly cynical, Kelly O'Mara. Kelly,
ouch.
Tell us, have you ventured into the outdoors this week?
You're asking if I've left my house and my cat at all?
Pretty much. I'm getting worried about you.
There was a day I didn't leave the house. It's true. I'm assuming you mean outdoors more than just walking to the grocery store, right? Like that's when we talk the outdoors, capital T, capital O. It feels very like fancy. Requires a tent.
You might need some poles.
Some poles. I'm not really that into that kind of thing, actually. I will run through it when I run.
Do you run on trails when you train?
I live by national parks and state parks, and yes, so I am outside. I run on trails all the time. I don't really spend more than many hours. No nighttime trails.
No nighttime trails. No camping. Okay, so on the show today, we are talking about diversity and equity in the outdoor space. So really, Kelly, what does that mean? I mean, surely the outdoors is somewhere where people can just go. So why do we need to talk about inclusivity and diversity?
Because you can't just go, right? I need a tent. I need poles. I need equipment. I need to know where to go. I need to know how to get there. I need to know what to do and so I don't die. And so there are a lot of obstacles, and increasingly, we are acknowledging that those obstacles hit certain groups of people more than other groups. A lot of organizations are trying to, get rid of those barriers and make it more accessible, more friendly, so people feel welcome, that kind of thing.
Yes. So coming up on the show, we have two of those experts. We have Aparna Rajagopal Durbin and Ava Holiday, who are founders of the Avarna Group. And the Avarna Group provides resources for organizations in the outdoor space, as I understand it. And they help create a more socially and environmentally just culture.
Well, that's good.
So in the news this week, let's start with a little light story. I'm actually kind of excited about this. There is a new gym, Kelly, in your area, in the Bay Area, where you can get fit and get stoned. So you have to let me do this. I want to read the subheader from the Outside magazine article. It says, "This May, the world's first cannabis-infused gym will open in San Francisco, where members will be encouraged to integrate the plant into their pre- and post-workout regime." So, Kelly, have you ever integrated cannabis in your workout regime?
I haven't, Did you know, actually, when you go to the World Anti-Doping Agency's website, one of the most frequently asked questions is what it's about, the effects of marijuana. Because with it being legalized in so many places, people are not sure how that's going to affect them. And one of those places that it's been legalized is here in California. Or, not legalized, but, it's spreading. Obviously, there's still a lot of dispute at the federal level. And there's also an increasing amount of evidence that it may have performance benefits. So this gym's opening. Yeah, see, that's why it's a doping issue. Because, yes, see, you didn't know this. Because it dulls the sensation of pain. That's why it was really big in ultra running, apparently. Rumor has it. And so this gym wants it to be known that it's not just a pot gym. It's really, first and foremost, a premier fitness, power plant fitness gym. But also they will be using pot.
I love your use of power plant.
That's what it's called.
It's amazing. Okay, a bit more serious story now. We had a 17-year-old transgender boy called Mac Baggs who won a girls wrestling competition in Texas. So I guess my question, first of all, is why is there a boy in a girls wrestling competition?
Yeah, at first when I heard this headline too, and people were talking about it, I was like, oh man, life is complicated sometimes, nuanced. And then I went and found out that it was a girl who was transitioning to become a boy and wanted to wrestle in the boys' competition. But Texas has a birth certificate rule where you have to compete in the division you're on your birth certificate. So they wouldn't let him compete in the boys' division. So then he had to compete in the girls' division. So then I was like, well, you guys did this to yourself. Now I don't feel there. Now there are things that are complicated. This was not complicated. Just let him wrestle with the boys.
Right. So he wanted to wrestle with the boys. They didn't let him. And then he won the girls competition.
Yeah.
Not shocking.
I don't know. It just kind of feels like people are making this into more than it is,
Yeah, I agree. It kind of leads to my gripe for this week. I have a gripe. Mm-hmm. So I read an article about this same boy, but from a different perspective. Maybe I shouldn't have read it, and I especially should not have read the troll comments below, which infuriated me. But in the actual article itself, the woman who wrote it was making the point that, well, okay, if you allowed transgender people to compete in the category that in which they identify, then you would have to allow transgender girls to compete with cisgender girls, right? So she says, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And that would mean that boy wrestlers who want to be girls could wrestle as girls and, obviously always win.
I think it's the obviously that's killing you there, isn't it?
Obviously that's just putting me over the edge, because I feel that it's not obvious. And not only that, but experience dictates that it's not obvious that if you just put a random boy and a random girl, I'm not talking about elite, the best in the world. It's just a random, even sometimes the best in the junior level. It's not necessarily foretold that someone's going to win just because their gender is male. So do you remember that transgender girl in Alaska who ran 2 track events with the girls, what was it, with no hormones, so was hormonally male, and she finished 3rd and 5th in the track events. Obviously didn't win.
See, I think what's really killing you here, what's killing you is not the nuanced debate going on about transgender rights and the spectrum of gender. It's that somebody thought a guy obviously would always beat a girl. That is what is killing you.
That is what is killing me. Because this person's supposed to be a journalist.
Well, they just let anyone be journalists.
Right. I mean, really.
I mean.
Standards, people. Standards. Okay, so we also have a pretty fun hype. American climber Margot Hayes sent the most difficult climb of any woman in history.
We were trying to use the right terms here. She completed a 5 point
up it.
It means she went up it, a 5.15A climb. And now there's obviously debates about like gradings and what qualifies as what. And there have been other women who have done like almost as hard climbs, but she's the first woman to do a pure 5.15A in Spain. There's actually only like a little over a dozen people who have done this climb period, and there's only 2 grades of climbs currently graded that are higher than that. So it's technically like the hardest climb a woman has ever completed. So there you go.
She's amazing.
I looked at some of her pictures. That stuff looks crazy. Look up her pictures. Yeah.
Okay, so Kelly, tell us a little bit about Aparna and Ava, who we're about to talk to.
Aparna Raja Gopal Durbin worked in the outdoor space doing, outdoor education. She did a whole project up in Alaska called Expedition Denali, inspiring diversity in the outdoors. And so she comes from that kind of outdoor space. And then she teamed up with Ava Holiday, who did a PhD from like the research side of things about American environmentalism, equity and inclusion, and how, the history of that. And so they've come together and are working with a ton of really big organizations, the National Forest Service, the YMCA, and helping them with very specific tools, not just talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but here's, how you can go and look at what are the barriers in your organization. Instead of just saying, we're going to hire X number of people of color, what can you actually do from the ground up to change the culture and to, get more people outside? And so they have some really interesting kind of academic takes on those barriers and what can be done. Thank you both for coming on the show. I was hoping you could start out by telling us a little, how did you guys meet? How did you decide to form this group? Why start the Avarna group in the first place?
Yeah, this is Aparna. So, when Ava and I met, I was working at the National Outdoor Leadership School in Wyoming, and I was serving as their diversity and inclusion manager. And Ava was literally doing research on diversity and inclusion in outdoor recreation and environmentalism. And so I was almost her research subject in a way. And we met and really hit it off. And there was about a month where both of our partners were in the field and we were, cohabitating and taking care of my son together. And we're scheming every evening about how amazing it would be for us to do this work, sort of not just in the outdoor education realm, but to really pop out of that box and do it for outdoor recreation, environmentalism, conservation, sort of the broader space of organizations and agencies that are doing their work in the outdoors. So that's really our origin story. We named it the Avarna Group, not just because we thought it was cute that it was Ava and Aparna, but The word Avarna actually means something in Sanskrit. It means one who transcends caste or color, which we thought was appropriate based on what we do. So that's really the what. I don't know, Ava, do you want to answer the why?
I was wondering about the name, by the way, so that's good to know.
Yeah, so the why really comes down to Aparna and I were often talking in the evening while making dinner about how we had a lot of colleagues and a lot of folks that we were talking to that were sort of thrust into these diversity, equity, and inclusion manager or director positions. And they were folks that were really well-intentioned. They were doing really great work. And at the same time, they would often say, hey, I actually don't really know exactly what I'm doing here. I'm really feeling it out. And so Aparna and I thought that given the combination of our expertise, we might be able to support those folks. And then from there, it sort of cascaded into all of these different ways that we imagined we could support individuals and organizations. And it happened to work out for us, and that folks did want that support and did need that support. So we got up and running pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can like trip over diversity consultants in many cities. And I think what makes us unique is that we both come from a background of being both outdoor enthusiasts and, outdoor educators. And we sort of built this niche not knowing really how big the need was. And we discovered very quickly that, as with many other spaces, outdoor education, outdoor recreation, environmentalism, conservation really need support with diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Aparna, you just mentioned that you can trip on diversity consultants. Can you explain a little bit about what diversity consulting is and what that really means? It seems like it's become a buzzword, but these are important conversations to have. So what are we really talking about?
Diversity is often used as code for race or ethnicity, and we actually don't prefer to lead with diversity. We lead with equity and inclusion, and I can explain why in a sec, but diversity is really how we define it is that it is the unique differences between us based on which we're treated differently in society. So it's not just all of the differences between us, like our personalities. I often say, just because I have an innie belly button and someone else has an outie belly button doesn't mean like suddenly my innie people have different access to opportunities in society, and that, incarceration rates are higher for my innie people, and we don't have access to education and healthcare, et cetera. It's really those differences, including race and ethnicity, but also sexual orientation, gender, class, socioeconomic status, age, those differences based on which we have different access to opportunities. And we would say diversity, a lot of folks call themselves diversity consultants, and they work with organizations or companies in order to actively work on diversifying their workforce or diversifying their customer base or constituency. And a lot of that has to do with hiring and marketing. And in the work that we do, Ava and I always say diversity is really the outcome. It's not what we actually do. We're helping organizations and agencies become more inclusive and equitable. And if they start focusing on inclusion and if they start focusing on equity, really the diversity will follow. I think if they just focus on diversity in hiring in their customer base, people may engage with them and then realize very quickly that they're just not a great place to, work in if they're an employee or engage with if they're a constituent. So really the inward focus of inclusion and equity is what we help organizations do. What that looks like is really, it depends on the organization. So the organizations we serve some are in youth development, some are camps, some are outdoor eds, some are environmental and conservation, some are government agencies, federal, local, and regional, that are working on public lands management. And they all need different things and they all have different struggles. And so sometimes we're just helping them navigate strategy, like what does it mean to engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion work? What are the inward-facing strategies you can engage in? What are the external-facing strategies you can engage in? Staff training and hiring and all that. And sometimes we're doing workshops or training for them on cultural competency, how to work with people who are very different from them. Sometimes we're doing webinars. Sometimes we're doing evaluations or audits of the climate within their organization and whether it's a welcoming place for people with different identities to work, to give them sort of a gauge of where they're at. So that's sort of what we do.
I want to definitely hear some more about what are the specific things people and places can do. But I think we should start with why do some of these places want to worry about inclusion and equity? Why do they care? Why is this important?
Sure. Is that for me or Ava?
Whichever. I'm assuming you both have an answer.
I'll let Ava get some airtime here since I've been talking.
I love this question because it's actually a question that we ask our partners and our clients as well. We, in fact, have an entire webinar that's posted online for free about the different various reasons why. We sort of categorize those whys because it's sort of the way that our brain works and that we like to fit things into a neat Venn diagram, even if it doesn't always work out specifically as planned. But we found that there are whys that folks have that really prioritize their organization. And so that sometimes you hear what we call the business case, that diversity and inclusion really support the organization's mission because increased diversity and increased inclusion means that you have just a better bottom line, whether that's profit or innovation or just teams working better together. There's a lot of good research about that. There's also whys that prioritize people and their experiences, whether that is experience within the organization or if it's an experience of, say, a student on course if you're an outdoor education organization. So really thinking about wanting those individuals to have everyone who has a touch point with that organization to have an inclusive experience that validates who they are. Folks feel like they can show up as their authentic selves. And that just, for the organization, really means that you have better program outcomes. For a conservation organization, that might mean that you're reaching all constituents and you're really speaking and listening to everyone who is potentially concerned about whatever project or advocacy piece that you're working on. And then we also hear a lot of whys about the environment and the future of environmentalism and conservation. Often people are saying that in the face of shifting demographics, mostly talking about shifting racial and ethnic demographics, they're saying we need these folks in the environmental and conservation world for our movement to continue because they are the future. And so those are some of the whys that come across. The why that I think really drives me and Aparna on a personal level is this why that there are multiple ways that people connect to the environment, and that is something that we really need to start paying much more attention to. I think that there's a pretty narrow way that environmentalism and outdoor recreation is sort of conceptualized, specifically in the U.S., and it excludes other ways that people connect to land. And that is something that if we can broaden our scope of learning all of the different ways that people connect to land and the environment, that's not only an equity measure in and of itself, but I also think that that allows us to think more creatively and more innovatively and more of an integrative fashion about the future of environmentalism and conservation and land connections as it relates to people's recreation or as it relates to their health or their spirituality. There's just a lot of work that sort of the Western world can explore in terms of understanding how folks connect to land and what we can learn from that and how that can support all of us moving forward. So that is a really long answer of all of the different reasons why people are interested in doing this work.
Absolutely. And just a follow-on question for Ava about some of the businesses you work with. Do you find an absolute increase in bottom line that you can tie to your work?
So for businesses, we have not worked with businesses that are, or organizations, I should say, we mostly work in the nonprofit world, and they're not necessarily looking at their bottom line. I haven't seen any of the organizations that we work with look into that sort of revenue bottom line piece. There is a lot of information that actually comes out of the tech sector about bottom line and increased diversity and inclusion. So there's research from Google and from Facebook that supports that, but we actually haven't seen our partners specifically concerned about the revenue.
You talked about the narrow view of environmentalism, particularly here in the U.S. And this is something, because I live in the Bay Area, this is something that I've been seeing kind of happen here over and over again. And I'm wondering if that is partially one of the barriers that has made the outdoor space not as inclusive. And what are some of the barriers that have made the outdoor space less inclusive than other things, perhaps? Like why are there so many barriers? Maybe Aparna can tell us a little bit about some of the barriers.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will start with just like my personal connection with the outdoors, which was really forged as a daughter of immigrants from India. My family decided that we would start going to a national park every summer. And I have a pretty big family. And the way that we would connect with nature was to go in a giant group, including grandmothers in multiple cars and a camper, and go to a national park. But we couldn't really go unless they had multiple group campsites that we could all, reserve for, because we just were such a big group. And it was unusual to be able to find that. And so the structures weren't really accessible for us to be able to go to every national park. And I think of those experiences as some of the most formative experiences for me in the outdoors, are like transformative experiences, because they really, really did forge my love for the outdoors. And so based on that, I think that there are a lot of barriers. So I'll start with just that, there's accessibility, similar to the group campsite thing. If we're thinking about outdoor recreation in the traditional sense and like the way the outdoor industry defines it, there are barriers such as transportation, getting out to some of these places, signage that isn't understandable for people for whom English isn't their first language, the gear and equipment that might be required to engage in specific recreational activities. So physical accessibility is one piece. And then the group campsite thing, too, is an accessibility piece, because if you can't go with your family, then who are you going to go with? That's what we would say in my family. So the other pieces we would say is that for some, outdoor recreation and the outdoor industry have just not been an inclusive place. Folks have actually experienced exclusionary incidents on public lands. For example, stares, if you look different, questions that might be well-intended but make people feel like they're an outsider or different. And there's some like pretty major acts of like aggression that people of color have experienced in the wilderness even recently. And for others, there's just a history of maybe potentially community trauma in outdoor spaces that lead them to like just not think of the outdoors or the wilderness as a welcoming place. For example, the African American community, and this is written in Carolyn Finney's book, Black Faces, White Spaces. The African American community not so long ago, there was lynching that happened in some of the places in which people recreate now. And so wilderness for some folks is not welcoming for historical reasons. For the Latino community, for example, the word wilderness literally translates into desert, and desert, especially for the American Latino community, has connotations involving migration, which is not positive. And so the concept can be challenging for communities that have historical trauma in these places. So there's access, there's historical trauma, there's like exclusionary incidents that happen. There's also societal barriers that some communities are experiencing right now that just make recreating just not really top of mind for them. People are facing, really like grave concerns about immigration, their right to even be in this country, healthcare, clean water, clean air. And so recreation just may not be top of mind for them, which is okay. And then I would say the final thing I would say is that people of color, if we're just talking about race and ethnicity, people of color are actually outside and connecting with nature. They're just not doing it in the way that the industry has defined outdoor recreation. So if we think of like the traditional like skiing and running and hiking and paddling, folks maybe are not doing those specific things. But that's because the industry just has a myopic view of what an outdoor connection should look like. And for a long time, for example, the industry didn't see fishing as a legitimate recreational activity until fly fishing just became a thing. It got like the it factor, and then all of a sudden fly fishing started showing up in the outdoor industry as like a recreational sport. And they went at the biannual outdoor retailer show, they would have like a pond in the middle of that all happened recently. And so like Ava said, people are actually connecting with the outdoors in different ways. We just don't see it, that people are connecting in their urban and local and regional parks, and they're biking, they're picnicking, they're playing soccer. REI actually did a really interesting study where they asked folks about whether they were outdoor enthusiasts instead of whether they were interested in outdoor recreation. And just by changing the word to enthusiast, they got a lot more people of color to respond affirmatively that they are engaged in the outdoors. So yeah, I would just say people of color are connecting with nature. And then there are a lot of reasons they're not connecting with it in very specific ways as defined by the outdoor industry.
That is fascinating. And one more question before we go for Ava. What are some of the things that some of our listeners might be able to do? Ordinary people who love the outdoors, who love to spend time there. How can we create change in that space?
Yeah, so we think about this in a couple of different ways. One is what can you as an individual do? And I think that on a really basic level, when you're outdoors, being friendly to all folks. I was actually just out this weekend and was really pleased that folks were so friendly, and it was a pretty visibly multicultural group, which was pretty cool to see. So I think that that's one very simple thing, is just being friendly to folks on the trail and not scouring. And I think that that's really basic. I also think individually on a level, on the individual level, it's also important to think about, and this is something that Aparna and I think about a lot, is how do sort of larger social justice issues connect back to the environment, to outdoor recreation. And we are definitely trying our best to write about this. We just wrote a blog about how conservation and environmentalism has been complicit in anti-immigration sentiment. And so continuing to peel those layers back and starting to connect whatever sort of social justice work you might do in your individual life and understanding how it might actually connect to your outdoor recreation life or your individual environmental advocacy, whatever it is you do. And then I think also, sorry, did anyone have a question?
No, I was really curious about the whole, how it is complicit in, I wanted to know more.
Yeah.
I wanted to know. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll give you the really brief version, and then we wrote a fairly lengthy blog post that you and other folks can go read with all that leisure time I'm sure folks have these days. But really what it comes down to is that there was an environmental sort of sentiment that there should be less people in the wilderness because it should be, quote unquote, an untrammeled space. We know it's not untrammeled, that folks have been living there and present for millennia. But that sentiment got translated into, therefore, we should not have more people in the U.S. who are going to trammel this land. And that's really present actually in Edward Abbey's work. Folks forget or don't know that about him, but he was pretty staunchly anti-immigrant and saying that these lands should be left alone and there should be no person in them. And particularly no immigrants should be in there because they don't know how to respect the land. And so that's one example, but that sentiment was pretty prevalent in the environmentalism, and in fact was pretty prevalent in the Sierra Club, and they have done a lot of work to denounce that and to walk back from that and be pretty transparent about it. And we have some colleagues that are really great at the Sierra Club, and so I don't want that to seem like a slight on Sierra Club, but it is part of their history. And there is a lot more to that, but I'll let you all go read the blog. Sure. Because we would be on the phone for a long time. So that on an individual level, that's really sort of how we think about it, is like just being a welcoming person. And I think that sometimes that means trying to understand what a microaggression is, and being able to understand if you've committed a microaggression, and that is a lot of just like self-awareness work, self-introspection, understanding who you are, and that can translate from like your outdoor rec world into all other facets of your life. On an organizational level, I think that depending on what your role is in your organization, pushing your organization to really think about equity and inclusion and articulate those whys for your organization and push that. And that's a lot of the individual support that we give folks. Sometimes we just hop on the phone with them. And, we do that work with folks who are in the environmental conservation outdoor rec field. But we think that, this work, we happen to be operating in this outdoor and environmental world because that's where some of our industry expertise lies. But this work needs to be done across the board. And then also thinking about on an industry-wide level of learning, if you were thinking about okay, this is the advocacy that I really want to be engaged in, I really care about the environment. If you're really pushing for, if you're really interested in a particular project, just doing your homework and learning about the potential impact of the project on all of the communities. Often there are some communities that don't get, for various reasons, don't get to have a say in a particular project or somehow get skipped over. And so if you're doing that sort of more industry-wide focus, just thinking about what that advocacy looks like, those are just some tips and tools. It really depends on who you are, what field you operate within, and sort of the spheres of influence that you have. Aparna, do you want to add anything?
No, I think one of the biggest, well, I do. The one thing I just wanted to, I said no, but yes, I do. On an organizational level, I think one thing we always encourage organizations to do is to look inward. And I think many organizations find it really hard to hold a mirror up and look at their practices and policies and protocols and procedures and all those P words to see where they might be inadvertently excluding people from certain communities. But that work, that internal work of navigating institutional bias is, I think, some of the most important work that organizations can do. It's a lot easier for them to automatically just say, where can we hire more people of color? Where can we hire more women? What are all the job sites? And I think that's sort of, it's just trying to take the easy path, which isn't actually that easy because then people of color and women show up and realize potentially that it's not that great a place to be. So I think that those internal strategies are some of the most important ones for organizations to be focused on.
Yeah, I saw one of your clients is the Forest Service, and I know they definitely have been dealing with some of those making it a more welcoming place for women and people of color issues. Well, thank you so much. I'm sure you guys obviously could do a whole presentation on all of the different tools and strategies, but we don't want to take too much of your time. So thank you so much for all of the information and for talking to us about this.
I'll just put in a plug. We have, because you are correct that we could talk for days about this. We have a resources page to support folks learning if this is something that we said piques their interest. It's on our website, which I'm assuming is going to be linked out on a webpage with you all. It's just a resources tab, and it's a searchable resources page with videos and articles. So if folks are wanting to learn more about this and wanted to either listen to more podcasts about this or read books or articles, that is there. We want to support folks learning because Aparna and I didn't arrive at this place where we know a decent amount just by happenstance. There's a lot of work that came before us, and a lot of that work is posted on our site on the resources page.
Great. Well, we will definitely link out to that so everyone can get more information.
Yeah, and I do have one more plug is that for folks who are for whom the Bay Area is accessible there are two events in June that might be interesting that are focused on the work that we do. One is a Women in the Outdoors Summit that's being put on by Teresa Baker, founder of the African American National Parks Experience, and a number of other partners. And that's on June 14th and 15th in the Presidio. And then we are working with the National Park Service and Groundwork USA and Youth Outside in the Bay Area to put on a conference called PGM1, which is People of the Global Majority in the Outdoors, Nature, and the Environment. PGM being another term for people of color, just a more empowering term. And so it's at Berkeley on June 27th, 28th, and 29th. And again, it's for people who identify as people of color or people of the global majority who are in the field, in any field in the outdoors, nature, or the environment. So I think both of those summits will will be really great for people to explore a little bit more the challenges and opportunities that lie for them with diversity and inclusion.
We just want to thank you both for joining us here in the locker room. It has been a fabulous conversation, and we really appreciate it. One thing that surprised me there, Kelly, was really how multi-layered the barriers are in the outdoor space. The historical piece, the financial barriers, education, plus, the basic way about how we treat people.
I think it's really easy to make this sound a lot more complicated than it is. You know, you have super academic-y sounding words. At a base level, what it actually is, though, is why don't you, if you think about yourself, why don't you want to go hiking or camping or skiing or whatever this weekend? You're like, well, I don't know how. I don't have the equipment. I don't have any friends who want to go with me. I don't even know where to start. I don't know what to do. People would be mean to me because I wouldn't know what to do. They would, those are all barriers that are stopping you. And those barriers obviously exist at a much greater magnitude in certain communities, not just, racial communities, though that is a big problem. Also economic communities, also people with disabilities, like all kinds of things. And so I think when we make it non-academic, we're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah.
It does make sense. And so we're going to follow up on this conversation a little bit in another episode of Locker Room.
Yeah, we're going to have some people talk about their actual experiences kind of as some of those marginalized community members out in the outdoor space.
I guess that's it for this week's episode of Locker Room Talk. Thanks again to Aparna and Ava for joining us. For more awesome women's sports coverage, go to wispsports.com and make sure you join myself and Iron Woman Alyssa Godesky next week for a new episode of the Iron Women podcast, and we are featuring one of triathlon's unsung heroes, in my opinion, Tara Norton. So we are excited to hear from Tara, and of course join Kelly and I right here in 2 weeks' time in the Locker Room.